Orphallique by Anton. Copyright 2023 Anton. All rights reserved. Translation and notes copyright 2023. Anton. Translated by Anton. Cover design by Anton. Photographs by Arthur Kravtsov, Irina Sidorenko, Anton. Orphallique. For Ira C. With love. Epigraph. Ira, you're turned on by the pH, it's so phallic. Me, I'd say the combination of R and pH, oral plus phallic equals orphallic. Orphallique. We've concocted the most stunning word. Ira, orphallic disease. From a conversation with Ira C. on Telegram. Since early morning, I swear, I've been walking around like a fool, repeatedly thinking about the same thing. What is it, you might ask, and I'll answer. Well, probably about the most unpleasant thing that any respectable and cultured person wouldn't want to think about during breakfast, for instance. Just imagine, some asshole, I'm entirely sure it was a man, right at the door of our entrance left his mark most strangely, by taking a massive dump. Damn it, a pile of shit. It's so massive and mushy I'm at a loss for words. Now that it's winter, this pile has slightly frozen, and you can see how it's covered with the thinnest layer of frost. Upon closer inspection, you can see what this citizen had eaten in this frozen mush throughout the day. He enjoyed eating corn and something, most likely a pie, with a poppy seed filling. I dare to assume that the corn was preceded by a salad of tomatoes and cucumbers, although I'm not sure about the latter. Kind people at first sprinkled the pile with sand, and other compassionate souls even placed newspapers on top, probably to warn those entering and exiting. But, judging by the shoe prints on the newspaper, their attempts were not particularly successful. The wind, scattered everything, blew everything away. I first saw this opus on the 28th of December, now of the past year. Yes, today is already the 5th of January. And this pile of first-class dark brown and last year's shit, unsuspecting of anything, is in plain sight for all, and, I must say, it presents an elegant trap and quite an interesting object for observation. Indeed, judging by the shoe prints, someone's fallen into this trap. Every time I step out for a smoke, I see this dark brown, akin to milk chocolate, consistency and think that this must be very strange. It sounds overly pompous if you ask me, but it is what it is. And among all of us, impeccable, cultured, and educated citizens, there was one who, alas, decided to break all stereotypes and disrupt the system and defecated right at the entrance. My neighbor, Ada Avlyevna, God forbid her health, the compassionate bub, immediately exclaimed, if I could get my hands on this arsehole. Suddenly, she fell silent for a few seconds, probably ashamed of her vocabulary, and then continued, grab this, him and, hit him with the door. With the door. The old hag gesticulated, raising her voice slightly. Exactly, exactly. I seconded her, smoking my second cigarette in a row and watching as the old woman grumbled and waved her hands. I'm a master at feigning my involvement and interest in the utterances of people who are strangers to me, especially such venerable and universally respected ones as Ada Avlyevna. It's a beautiful January day today. Yes, there's no snow. Well, there's no snow. No snow. But that's no excuse. The aging, but alas, not very successfully rejuvenating representative of not the fairest, as it turned out, sex couldn't calm down soon. All true, I repeated with an unchanged, indifferent expression. Only you understand me, sweet girl. She exclaimed joyfully, although she knew I was not a sweet girl, but then, must be a guy, or whatever else these restless old mops articulate. Yes, however, it doesn't matter. Consider it yourself, the matter is not at all in this, or rather, not in this pile of shit, but in other people's attitude to this, strange incident. Yes, precisely in this. In a week, when the pile is scattered by rigid sols, as usual, no one will remember it, I guarantee. Except for this, what's her name, immortal whore, Ada Avlyevna. She will still walk and lament for a couple of days after that. But the pile of shit will disappear. So, much more interesting is a person's attitude to the very fact of taboo concepts in our society. And when the hell did I manage to pick up such fucked up nerdy words and phrases? Why does something that all of us, even the residents of our beloved cultural capital, do daily cause such a storm of indignation? Honestly, everything that happens causes that very storm of indignation in Ada Avlyevna because she is not bad at producing waste in the mornings, judging by her nasty character, if, of course, there is a connection between all this and, of course, if we don't count the fact that she is one continuous waste. Essentially, perhaps, the person who did this right at the doors of the entrance had some arguments or was guided by something. Maybe this place was forced or, on the contrary, was chosen randomly. He did what each of us does every day or almost every, maybe one time or even more than one time. The very fact of defecation is very strangely perceived by people. On the one hand, it is intimate, however, everyone now does not tire of condemning what is natural. So, it'd be, say, strange to condemn everyone for breathing or blinking or thousands of other processes that occur in a person, many of which, for example, lead to what I'm now looking at, standing at the doors to the entrance. Everything's meaningless. Everything's meaningless. Everything's meaningless. Everything is meaningless. All. Everything is meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. Yes, it's funny, people are strange. For instance, if a child is crying on the street, no one really stares at them. Notably, if an adult woman or, worse, a man, walks down the street crying, every passerby considers it their direct duty to gawk like a lunatic. Do you think they all look to sympathize? Hell no. They want a spectacle because their life, overgrown with routine, stiffened and killed by the mundane, and their husband's dirty socks have bored them. Another example. If a child walks down the street singing, no one thinks they have some mental deviations. But hundreds of skewed glances meet their eyes if an adult walks and hums aloud. And no one can even think that the person is just singing. Or sing simply because they feel good. Or sing because they feel bad. Everyone stares at them and assumes that there's another madman. Perhaps he is mad, but it's hard not to get sick with this disease, realizing that love is a window or keys or that pain is a liquid. But let's get back to business. We live in such a beautiful city. Raising her head and the finger of her right hand to the sky, Ada Avlyevna couldn't calm down. This is an outrageous disgrace. She kept looking at me and, I suppose, expected a reaction more substantial than just a philosophical gaze into the distance and my in response. So what? I'm on Zoloft, and right now, it's that phase when I have a slight stupor mixed with calmness and fatigue from short-term euphoria. Furthermore, I'm much more interested in not listening to the grumbling old woman but thinking about the defecation result of a person unknown to me. Or maybe known. What if I know the person who did this, or saw them somewhere, at the market, for example, in the supermarket or at the post office, or in the bank, or God knows where else? Besides, even though Ada Avlyevna seemed kind and excessively sweet, I couldn't stand her. And, I dare to note, it was not because, in a fit of her postmenopausal syndrome and marasmus in its worst manifestation, she called me a faggot. Imagine that, a faggot. Of course, she was embarrassed when she called the unknown recidivist an idiot. Oh, there was a situation. Ada Avlyevna dared to remark that I dressed too provocatively and that if I lived in the times of her youth, God knows when that was, I would be in trouble, whatever that meant. I smiled sweetly at the venerable citizen and the old-timer of our excellent and exemplary entrance to extinguish the emerging conflict, but Ada Avlyevna aimed for the conflict itself, and apparently, she clearly didn't intend to extinguish it. Are ya? She was apparently pleased to address me as a female. Are you even old enough? In our time, no one came home this early after lunch from work. Don't you work? She looked at me as if I were a spy or, what's worse, someone who defecated at the entrance. Undoubtedly, I didn't respond and just smiled sweetly, as if my mouth with its whitened teeth and my entire heart were filled with love for the impeccable Ada Avlyevna. I knew such behavior infuriated people, so I often employed this tactic. Ada Avlyevna, who apparently couldn't help but be outraged, suddenly, enraged beyond recognition, blurted out, "And since you don't work, where did you get the apartment? Did you suck your way to a 3-room, huh? Spread your worn-out charms?" I don't know whether her last phrase was a question or a statement, but Ada Avlyevna wasn't embarrassed at all. On the contrary, she snorted, then spat, and walked away, then stopped again and, turning to me, said, "You faggot." I smiled at her again and thought she finally understood I belonged to the male gender. Amusingly, she hobbled towards the grocery store, and I continued. I must say, my mood that day was excellent, as I was also under the influence of the same Zoloft, so I had no choice but to burst into laughter. I swear, I laughed like a witch at the most festive Sabbath. Pleasure. Yummy yummy. In short, I stood there smoking. Honestly, I've lost count of which cigarette this was, and thought about how interesting this was. Honestly, the entire situation is insanely intriguing. On the 27th of December, everything was clean here, and no one imagined that on the morning of the 28th, such a revelation would horrify everyone. So, most likely, on the night of the 27th to the 28th of December, someone, a man, most likely, as I've noted before, perched his behind near the door, as close to it as possible, and, pulling down his pants and squatting, began to strain his entire body, quickening his breath and, contracting and relaxing his sphincter, started releasing dark brown sludge. I wonder what he felt at that moment. Was it extreme for him? Was he scared? Was he excited? Was it pleasant? Was it easy for him to devise the idea to park himself right there and defecate in that manner? Also, I'm curious if there were any accompanying sounds and if he tried to suppress them. Did he smell his own shit, and how quickly was he trying to get it done? Oh, so many questions. If I could, I'd ask him even more. For instance, I'm curious if he was humming a song or a tune in his head or, perhaps, thinking about a loved one. Was he planning his next day or intending to relax at home, on the couch, reading something from Marquez, say, or Nietzsche? What guided him when the last drops of his shit left his flesh? All these questions are pretty interesting, but a more crucial point should be examined in more detail. This point is the moment of existence. Imagine the man or young guy who dumped a pile of shit at the entrance and lived an entire day. Undoubtedly, he ate something, some ingredients of his diet are known to us, as I've mentioned, met someone, thought about something, called someone, drank something. Then, he was walking somewhere at night or in the early morning. When he squatted and began releasing the first particles of feces with the first urge, he released a part of himself that had lived with him for an entire day, maybe more, maybe less. By the time he'd finished shitting, his shit was already outside of him, and therefore, it ceased to exist for him, it ceased to exist with him. He ceased to exist in an inseparable kinship with his shit. It's like the birth of a child. When a woman releases a fetus, it already exists in another guise and outside of its mother. The stranger's body began producing the next batch of shit, which he would release somewhere else, maybe at home, maybe in a cafe or somewhere else. When he pulled up his pants and left, he essentially left a part of himself, detached it from himself, and went his own way. Now this part of him exists separately from him, although until that moment, this portion of shit was part of this stranger, whom Ada Avlyevna dubbed a fool and was embarrassed herself. Poor thing. And what if the plot is even more dramatic or even tragic? What if the mysterious stranger and criminal took a shit an hour later, went about his business, and was shot or stabbed in one of the city's alleyways? The former owner of the shit is dead and probably does not exist, for there is now only his dead body, a corpse, and it can no longer think and feel. He's no more in this case, and he, accordingly, no longer exists. Now only his dead body exists, his shit continues to exist, and various biological processes are still happening. What if the criminal was killed 10 minutes after he took a shit? This is even more brutal. The owner of the shit, now former, no longer exists. And his shit hasn't even cooled down yet and might still be emitting a slight and barely noticeable steam. It was a bit chilly outside. Besides, the residents of our entrance, unlucky enough to step in the shit due to their carelessness, were spreading the still existing shit of a now non-existing person with their souls. It can even be assumed that all these people are prolonging the existence of the criminal and his crime. But in reality, it's a pity if that's the case. But if Ada Avalyevna learned about the possible death of the shitter, she would immediately throw up her hands and, in an impossible ecstasy, would start lamenting that God justly punished the scoundrel, that he deserved it, and all that. But the particles and the tiniest atoms of the stranger's shit will be absorbed into the earth, the grass, and the sols. He is now infinite. Nevertheless, I lingered there, but there were still many things to do. I'd planned to visit an extraordinary establishment, a cafe, probably, this evening. It's a private place, for members only, because everything there is complicated. My friend Eva once dragged me there. In this cafe, everyone wears clothes covering the entire body and face. In other words, everything, down to the fingertips. Talking is prohibited from the moment you enter until the moment you leave. This prevents interlocutors from determining each other's gender. Thanks to the semi-darkness in which everyone sits at the tables, it's challenging to identify a person's gender by their silhouette or height. This act aims to choose a sexual partner or partners for the evening and seclude him, her, or them in one of the dark red rooms. But more on that later. I went back home and made a few phone calls. Then I brewed myself a coffee. How I love this drink. Usually, I add cognac to it, but this time I didn't. Last month, I was on Zoloft, and this month I'm on it again. It's not worth consuming alcohol, although I must admit, I really want some wine, white, dry, and tart. Perhaps, I'll allow myself to have it there, as my psychoanalyst said that a glass of dry white is okay, but not often. After spending another half an hour at home, I realized that this attempt to smoke in silence was also unsuccessful. A few seconds after I lit a cigarette and took the first drag, a man of about 60 with the green glass of a bottle peeking out of his pocket approached me. Extending some money to me, he said. With all due respect, kindly sell me a cigarette. I'll just give it to you. No need for money, I said dryly to indicate that I expected to hear at most a thank you and nothing more. But the stranger didn't get the hint and decided to tell me his entire life with the most detailed analysis. Yes, I had to listen to his wife, who died suddenly from cancer or something else 5 years ago. Then I was told that the man standing before me had worked as a driver for 37 years and would have continued working if not for the accident in which he killed someone. I was told about selling the parental apartment to pay all the bills after the damned accident and avoid jail. I'm not a fan of such heartfelt conversations with strangers because I don't consider myself a waste pit where everyone can dump their next batch of waste. Besides, I hoped that going out into the street again, I could just silently smoke and not think about anything, except, of course, the pile of shit that, as almost an hour ago, still sat at the entrance door. But no. They didn't let me do it this time, either. Oh, this Petersburg intelligentsia with a beer bottle in the pocket. In any case, there was nothing to do, and I needed to pass the time. I started pondering the idea of my costume for today. Not coming up with anything special, I decided to call Eva, but she didn't pick up. Apparently, she was indulging in midday amorous pleasures. Prone to experiments in all manifestations, she didn't have a thought to stop. Most likely, today, she was pleasing another mulatto. She had a kind of fetish for mulattoes, in her bed with unpretentious sexual toys like dildos. She often joked that all her games were anal. She deliberately made this pause after the letter B to play with words. I decided to read. I took the first book that came to hand from the shelf and began to touch its pages. Books are very tender. They are so fragile. You know, I love touching their pages. Book pages are the body of the book, just as fragile and delicate. I often smell books. They have such an incredible scent. What's more, you can be free and uninhibited with a book, it won't judge. It has no brain, it doesn't think. But what's also interesting is how the author exists in the letters and words written by him. Even if the writer is dead, he exists in his stories and poems. On the other hand, what if a book written by someone is already a separate entity, a separate organism, which exists outside its master, which is now independent? The author died and no longer exists, only his corpse or ashes exist. But it can also be assumed that a person in the process of his life gives birth to many things, be it a pile of shit or a book or something else. Thoughts didn't tire me, Zoloft did everything that was required of it. With such advantages, I forgive it for some side effects, which the manufacturer and the Ministry of Health politely warn. I still decided to go out for a smoke. Again, to my surprise and luck, no soul was near the entrance. I lit a cigarette and began to ponder what costume to come up with tonight, to not repeat myself and to make it difficult to identify myself as a person. I hadn't taken the second drag when, imagine, the same stranger who tried to buy a cigarette from me approached. But the essence is not even in this, but in the fact that without the slightest twinge of conscience, he continued to tell his life precisely from the moment he stopped. I pretended to listen. He pretended not to remember how he had met me today. Sweet. I decided there would still be no quiet day today, and it would hardly be possible to smoke in silence and peace. The evening came somewhat unexpectedly. I didn't go out to smoke any more. Damn it. What a weird day it turned out to be. At this rate, I'll soon quit smoking, as this ritual is something like a rest. I don't think about anything and, at the same time, think about everything. Just today, when I left the entrance to smoke, some rubbish started saying something. Nevertheless, time flowed down the misted windows of my apartment, and I realized it was time to get ready and leave. I wore my new costume, which I whipped up quickly. The taxi was already waiting at the entrance, and I realized it was time. I went down and got into the car. The taxi driver was not surprised by the strange outfit of a medieval doctor during the bubonic plague, or as it is also called, the Black Death. Don't even ask where I got all this paraphernalia because I can't find an answer myself. I have a habit of keeping a pile of unclear, strange things at home, which I use for no less strange purposes. Imagine, even my hat with huge fields and a beak of abnormal size did not confuse him. When we arrived at the destination, I paid for the service and gave a generous tip, as the driver was polite and didn't even try to start a conversation with me. I value this trait in drivers, among many others, immensely. And even later, I don't regret spending more than necessary. I entered the cafe. To be honest, I wouldn't call this establishment a cafe, as it was something like a private club. Music of various genres was buzzing here. There was a huge dance floor, but few people danced on it. Everyone preferred to walk around the perimeter of the establishment or sit at their tables in the hope that someone would choose them, and who exactly, this is a secondary question. The main goal of this establishment was to provide its visitors with sexual satisfaction. Drugs and alcohol were not prohibited here, like any other pleasures. The main thing is to follow the basic rules. If a club member is interested, you must hand him or her a red card. Provided that it is accepted, 2 or more people were supposed to follow to the area of dark red rooms. The whole procedure should be absolutely without words so as not to reveal the gender of any of the participants. The intercourse was primarily silent until the participants discovered each other's gender. After entering the dark red room, there is no way back, and the participants must finish what they started. Even just standing and watching is considered participation. But, in any case, this is less interesting than taking a direct part. Frankly, I've never suffered from voyeurism, and I loved being the leading actor, and the role doesn't matter. The gesture system was also in play and held a vital role. If one of the participants pointed their index finger, it meant they were only interested in oral pleasures. If the index finger was accompanied by the palm of the other hand, it signified a readiness for full sexual intercourse. If someone raised their right hand, the visitor was open to anything that could happen. These gestures helped people choose their partners. I had an uninteresting day today and decided I wanted to let loose completely. I raised my hand, and immediately 2 individuals expressed their interest to join me in the dark red room. I accepted both, and without a word, we disappeared into the red semi-darkness of the hall. One figure was dressed as a mummy but in a colossal cloak, the other was a harlequin in a sad mask. As you understand, I had no idea who I was with and what we would do. But the secrecy and mystery, I got my favorite combination, a man and a woman. Judging by their genitals, they were young. Their bodies were firm, and they, like me, sought pleasure. They had likely taken ecstasy or something else while I was sober. Initially, I thought it wouldn't be very good because I wasn't feeling much emotion. But suddenly, I felt a hand slide into my trousers, and skillful fingers played between my buttocks. I don't know why, but I liked it. Another hand embraced me and, removing my beak, clung to my mouth. A moment later, I felt the hot mouth of a man in my groin, his slightly unshaven chin rubbed against my legs, delivering insane pleasure. Later, when the girl was done with my mouth, a solid male hand pushed me to my knees. I understood what was expected of me by the sound of the unzipping fly on the harlequin's trousers. He gripped my head with both hands, and my hat fell off. He pressed me extremely hard, making me lose my breath. The pace was intense. At the same time, I felt a female hand removing my trousers and underwear, eager to caress me from behind. In a few minutes, I found myself between the 2 of them. Damn it, how did they know this is my favorite position? He entered me instantly, and I entered my female partner. It was surreal for us. After that, we changed positions and started pleasuring each other repeatedly. They poured wine for me, and I couldn't refuse. A lot was drunk, but it was an unreal pleasure. White. Dry. Sharp. As I later guessed, they also slipped something into my alcohol because the world around me was changing before my eyes, and I wanted to live. I didn't even notice when we fell asleep. No one could wake us up because no one was allowed to enter. I woke up in the morning, closer to noon, if I were to believe the dial of my watch. My partners were still asleep. Our faces, as per the rules, were covered. I was curious to look at those who had pleasured me and whom I had pleasured, but I was afraid that it might spoil the impression. What if I didn't like their appearance? I dressed and left. The darkness in the hall helped me leave almost unnoticed while the revelry continued. Yes, this establishment operates around the clock and always has visitors. I stepped outside and realized that this was one of my best visits. I decided to walk home. Yes, in the same costume. I don't even know how passers-by looked at me. I was engrossed in thoughts about that pile of shit, the existence of shit and its owner in different planes, and the fact that life is devoid of fantasies in our time. We, humans, have forgotten what dreams are in their primal form. Thanks to the fact that I have the opportunity to visit such a place, I can break away from reality and get what I want. For example, now I was walking and enjoying the fact that my mouth smelled of the cock of a man unknown to me and his taste in my mouth. He's probably still sleeping, and his taste and smell continue in me or now exist in me. Moreover, judging by the taste on my tongue, I can confidently say that he came into my mouth. His sperm, flowing down my throat, penetrated my stomach and is now actively absorbed by my body. Now we exist together. Even if I go home and go to the toilet, the tiniest particles of the semen of a man unknown to me will exist in me. I decided to smoke. No, I didn't want to overpower the taste and smell of tobacco. I just like to smoke in the morning. Bringing the cigarette to my mouth, I felt that there was also a smell on my hands. It was the smell of the woman with whom I was lucky to spend the night. Judging by the smell of the vagina on my hands, she was not more than 30 years old. Too young to participate in such an event, it seems to me. But on the other hand, I could be wrong. Women are always complicated, and no one can ever solve their mystery. The smell of this lady also continues, thanks to me, but it is less long-term. As soon as I wash my hands, thoroughly and with soap, the smell will weaken. But still, it is interesting to observe and realize how our tastes and smells live outside us when we part with them. My taste and my smell also exist in my night partners. And even if I am killed now, I will carry on in them. I was walking home, looking ahead. The main thing I realized is that I like to live. I like to live this way. And I don't care what Ada Avalevna would say if she saw me in that club. The only thing I would want now is to brew myself a coffee, add a little brandy and smoke, pondering the existence of the living and non-living, about the existence of a person in and out of prejudices. And I'd sincerely like to know that the person who shat near our front door is also a faggot, because he'll become one if Ada Avalevna, the never-aging intellectual, sees him. Yes, she'll also label him a fag. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Like thousands of snapshots with gigabytes of tastes and smells in my memory, like the annoying knocking of sunbeams in the windows shuttered tight, like the touch of icy wind on the surface of my eye, like a fleeting euphoria with an invariable taste of a little suicidal coprophilia at the slightest thought of you, that's me. Like a window opened by the wind, like the taste of rain, vodka, and cigarettes on and under my tongue, mixed and incomprehensible, but adding up to the chloride odor of your semen, that's me. Like a memory of those who didn't come out, those who gave up, and, of course, those who have already been, like a harbor whore huddled near the harbor waiting for a ship with new customers, that's me. Like the woolen bracelet or the scarf, the taste of woolen tenderness and mind-numbing fetishism, standing at your knees, and like the fall of an invulnerable stone from a great height, like the pain of abrasions on my knees and elbows from nights spent in love, then on the verge of madness, with the taste of orgasm, your orgasm, under my tongue, like your feet trembling with pleasure, that's me. Like the smell of your clothes, like the color of the sky reflected in your eyes, like your fingers in the dust of the roads, salty to the taste, like an actor in my theater, freaks, of course, that's me. And they, the actors, all of the same lovable freak theater, all of them, without exception, every last one, triumphant. Many are now beloved by the audience. Tonight's performance was a success, too. Sarah, the girl who always opens and closes the show by coming on stage with a child-sized coffin on wheels, is also triumphant. She's been introduced closer to the fat-ass bastard who always comes to the theater shows to admire Sarah. Today, for example, he's down to his underpants several times upon seeing her on stage. He, it must be said, was dumbfounded with joy. He paid a considerable sum to be allowed to look at Sarah closer and to get to know her. Paying the theater director extra gave him access to the girl's genitals. First, he touched her small baby penis with his engorged fingers. A few seconds later, he squatted in front of Sarah and touched the foreskin of her penis with his tongue, vile and smelly. "Salty it is," the fat fucker said softly, licking his upper lip and smiling lustfully. Since this citizen is the most devoted theatergoer because Sarah, the organizer of the freak theater, even offered him a gift, which the fat fucker was so happy about that he probably come in his already wet cum-soaked underpants. As a gift, he was presented with a diamond-encrusted box. When the fat man opened it, he knew what was in it. The fat freak theater audience, sweating like a bitch, found Sarah's feces in it. His eyes lit up, and his fat, ugly fingers began to shake. He closed the box and opened it again a moment later. Squatting down again, he began to sniff the contents of the gift box. "I want to devour it," he said in a trembling whisper. "Can I?" asked himself, and with careful movements, he touched the feces with the tip of his tongue. Sarah, now standing in the middle of the stage, looked at the deranged freak and smiled. After a moment, she walked over to him, squatting down, and whispered in his ear in her childlike chaste voice with his fat fingers, "The fat fucker insatiably smeared his mouth with a brownish dark substance like chocolate that had just begun to melt." Blushing. The delicate veins in his eyes grew even redder. Gasping with delight and pleasure, he collapsed to the floor. By all appearances, he was having a heart attack. Naturally, no one rushed to save him. On the contrary, everyone waited obediently for this sweaty, shit-smeared body to choke on Sarah's feces and stop breathing due to suffocation. And it did. "Good job, Sarah," said the skinny, exceptionally handsome director and manager of the Freak Theater. He continued, my children," he spoke, slightly mannered, addressing all the participants, Sarah has brought us such a booty as this. Now you know what to do." The audience cheered at what they saw. The wave of applause periodically faded in the hall, then again rolled from the end to the beginning, closer to the stage. All the actors in the Freak Theater approached the dead body. One by one, their hands began undoing the buttons of the expensive jacket, then ripped open the shirt and began licking the body itself. Sarah preferred to stay back, watching and holding the rope that allowed her to roll the coffin onto the stage. "I don't want to eat, Daddy," she said to the director, who was not her father. The delighted actors were digging into the flesh of the fat faggot, and everyone was trying to get to the insides as soon as possible. "Wonder what he ate today?" Suddenly, someone asked. When the insides of the fucking castrato were pulled out, it appeared that he had indulged in eating poppy seed pies, lettuce, and corn. Seeing that the abdomen was almost empty and that the backbone was barely visible through the blood and lumps of dirt, Sarah walked over to the dead body, spread her legs so that the belly that had been ripped open by the sloppy bites was in the daylight, and began to pee directly into the vast hole in the abdomen, saying in a half-whisper, "Cleansing. Cleansing. Cleansing. That's how it was, honey."